Back in March 2023, I embarked on a small PC project where, for as little money as I could possibly spend, my aim was to build a low-cost PC that I could use for my upstairs room for recording gameplay capture from older retro consoles and so forth, and also occasionally play some games. I spent £35 at Computer Exchange on this Lenovo E73 desktop small form factor PC. It was bought from Computer Exchange. It was packaged very well, and it was delivered quite quickly as well to boot, so I have no faults to say about the quality of the service I got. And I received this, a small office-style PC that you could probably see in pretty much any business anywhere in the country for the small sum of £35. It features a dual-core Pentium processor, of which the specs of this machine as I received it will be up on screen in a moment, 4GB of RAM, and a 500GB internal hard drive, which was simply a mechanical hard drive, and as well as a DVD rewriter drive with Windows 10. I received this for £36.95 delivered. I'm going to be keeping a running total of the cost in the bottom left-hand side of the screen, and I set to work on buying little bits such as a 32GB SSD for the operating system, which cost me just £6, again with £1.95 delivery. I also purchased a new CPU for the machine to replace the Pentium dual-core machine dual-core processor that it came with. I replaced it with an Intel Core i5 4460S, a 65-watt socket LGA 1150 processor featuring 4 cores and 4 threads. I did this to add a bit more grunt to the machine, so that for the video editing and things like that, I could do a little bit more than I would be able to do on the dual-core processor, which honestly really isn't up to an awful lot these days. I had a bit of thermal compound, and I replaced this processor pretty much as soon as I got the machine. The project then sort of was left standing for a little while as I contemplated what I wanted to do with it, in terms of upgrades and things like that. So that's what I did. I simply left it in the side of my room for a little while until I had an idea of what I really wanted to do. And then, a little while later, I picked out 8GB of DDR3 1300 memory from my PC box of crap, which any person who builds PCs will have. So the memory was upgraded. I also purchased a brand new case for it, a SIT Darkstar case. It's a MIDI style case, and I've bought this before. I use it in my main PC, and it's actually a fantastic piece of kit. That took the total up to £86.80. Then I purchased this AMD Radeon RX 462GB. It's an old card released in August 2016, but it's still fairly competent as long as you can manage your expectations with what it is exactly you want to do with it. It initially released at £90. I picked this up for £25 at my local store. It requires no additional power connectors. It simply runs off the motherboard's own power supply, and it's a competent card, if not something you'll be playing all your games at Ultra with. To top all of these bits off, I also purchased a new power supply to replace the proprietary power supply inside it, because I couldn't use the Lenovo power supply. This was, I think it was around £40 something, and is a 500 watt power supply, which I've used again in my own PCs before. Anyway, let's move on to the games. So all of the gameplay you see here today will be from games where I have captured the gameplay from an external capture card. So it's not limited by anything like MSI Afterburner and internal recording. Overwatch 2 is up first. Overwatch 2 was a really smooth experience. The FPS is capped at 60, as I think that's what realistically people are going to aim for. There were some slowdown issues when the game was loading up, and when I first got into the game. The frame rate would drop to the late 30s, early 40s in terms of FPS, but once the match was well underway, this would eventually settle down, and Overwatch 2 on the lowest settings at 1080p was quite a smooth, decent experience. It is definitely something you could play with this card. It's an esports title, so it's designed to run on pretty much anything out there. The more people can run this, the more players they have and the more money they make. So I wasn't too worried about this one. It ran well, it played well, and once we got past the initial loading and everything else like that, I have no complaints to make about it. You'll notice that the Core i5 4460S is pegged at 100% on this game, This was only the only real game where I saw this on, and most of the time it was the RX 460 that was pegged to 100%. So this one was sort of an exception in all the games I've tested today. But yeah, overall a decent experience for the RX 460 on Overwatch 2, 1080p, low settings. Next up, we're going to go into Fallout 4. This was again at 1080p. I ran this on medium settings and 1080p resolution. It was okay. As you can see here, I'm going through Concord and it stays sort of solid at 60 FPS. When there's a bit more going on, it did drop a little bit to the sort of late 30s, early 40s again. I don't think that this was a major issue. The graphics card here is definitely the bottleneck. It was pretty much at 100% the entire time. As when combat starts picking up, it does drop to the mid 40s, which isn't perfect, but for 25 quid graphics card, I don't really think there's much cause for complaint here. It played well enough that you could easily play right the way through this game with no issue whatsoever. Moving on to my next game is The Witcher 3. The Witcher 3 was once again 1080p, recorded at medium settings using the DirectX 11 render mode, so it's not quite as good as the next gen version of the game. The game was pretty solid at around 30-35 FPS, and overall it was a more than playable experience again. For a card that is this year now 7 years old, it was a really decent performer actually. I was pleasantly surprised by how well these games performed. That 34-35 FPS stayed fairly solid right the way through my hour or so playthrough of the game. It would definitely be playable like this, and if you were running on a limited budget, I could find no faults with the machine that I've built here. It was overall a very decent experience. Dead Island Definitive Edition is next, and this is at 900p with medium settings and view distance selected to about halfway on the slider. I had some issues with this at 1080p, and I would rather have a more consistent frame rate than a higher resolution. So I lowered the resolution to 900p, which is the old sort of sweet spot as far as I'm concerned in terms of game resolutions. It doesn't look particularly different from its 1080p presentation, but the frame rate was much better. You can see here that we're averaging 60, 70, 80 FPS. There was no stutter or any issues like that to speak of. The graphics card once again is pegged at 100%, and you can see that the Core i5 4460S isn't really doing an awful lot here. It's sort of at 55, 60%. So you could pair this with a more powerful graphics card and still have more than enough power from the CPU to be able to see the benefits of that extra power. But yeah, overall, once again, a really decent experience and something you could quite easily play through from start to finish with no real issue. Moving on to Grand Theft Auto 5, I include this one as I feel that its popularity makes it appropriate for me to include. This is at 1080p, all the settings were normal, and all the detail sliders were set to about halfway. Going through downtown here, you can see that the frame rate stays fairly solid in the sort of late 50s and 60 FPS. Once again, all my games were capped to 60 FPS, as I feel that this is what people will do the most anyway with their monitors. I could benchmark these titles in future in a different video for those of you who are more interested in what the max you can get from this system is, but I think that most people are going to be more than happy with 60 FPS. As you can see here, a really smooth experience. There were very few dips here and there. I ran this from a 240GB Samsung Evo SSD. You'll recall that earlier on I mentioned that I spent £6 on a 32GB SSD for the internal system. However, this wasn't giving me the performance in games that I felt that the system should have been getting. So I swapped out the 500GB mechanical hard drive, which I was using in the system, and replaced it with a 240GB Samsung Evo SSD. So that's the only change that I haven't really documented here. And as I already had it lying around, it didn't cost me anything. Once all these games were put on the SSD though, there was no real issue with any of them. Grand Theft Auto 5 ran fantastic, and once again, you'd be more than able to play this right the way through with no issues. A little bit of an older game now, but still a solid game to cover, I think, is Fallout New Vegas. This has a benefit of pretty much being able to run on any machine you can really make. So this was at 1080p, high settings, and as you can see here, the frame rate was varying between sort of 40 and 60 FPS. One of the things I did notice in this game is I would see what felt like loading drops when I entered a different area or things like that. I actually think that this might be down to me installing this without realizing to an external drive I'd hooked up to the machine just for a bit of extra storage on the thing. So maybe I need to revisit this one in future when it's installed onto an SSD. Overall, the game was absolutely fine to play. I think that the fluctuating frame rate in bits and pieces here was more my fault rather than the actual game performance fault. For some strange reason, MSI Afterburner kept on recording the GPU usage at 0%. I don't think that's the case. But as you can see here, the usage of both the GPU and CPU remains quite low. So this isn't a very taxing game. It plays on pretty much everything that you could find for it. So yeah, it's more than playable again. I may need to revisit this one though because of the external installation that I mentioned before. Would I recommend that you build a PC like this for this kind of money? Well, it'd be hard to recommend. Simply because there were a couple of things I had to deal with that weren't so great. So when I received the Lenovo SFF PC, it came with a strange 14-pin motherboard connector, which I had to resolve by purchasing a 24-pin motherboard connector adapter to actually be able to use an external power supply on this. I think that for maybe 20-30 quid less, you could probably save a bit more money on the parts. I purchased all these parts from brand new, or in the case of Computer Exchange, secondhand, from retail stores. I think the used market might be better to find pricing on. So I probably could have saved 20-30 quid on the actual building of this PC. With that said though, overall it's been a really good experience building this. If you'd like to see more videos like this on my channel, please let me know. If you'd like me to see, or if you'd like to see me embark on a specific project that you've been thinking of, also let me know in the comments. I may revisit these games to bench them at some point. Other than that, I've got a few other videos coming up soon enough. I just purchased a Steam Deck, so you'll be seeing some more Steam Deck stuff on. And yeah, I hope to see you soon in those videos. Until next time, guys, thanks for watching and take care.